so that anybody else who shows up knows that I mean it when I say we start at 7 p.m. Well, tonight, as you can see, it's our second session, as probably you know, because you were here last week. That's good. And tonight's session is The Chain of Christianity Moves Westward. And there's going to be, we're going to reference more history tonight, and hopefully interesting history to you, history that hopefully inspires us to remember how significant it is when men and women apply their Christianity to not only their personal life, but into their public life as well. So let's start with a word of prayer before we dive into our subject tonight. Heavenly Father, I thank you that we have opportunities like this to come together and to have our minds and our hearts challenged. And Father, I pray that will be what happens in this course, this session, that we would be challenged, we'd be strengthened, our faith would be emboldened as we take a moment to witness the advance of Christianity around the world. And that in spite of whatever our eyes and our ears may tell us about what's happening around us, we would remember, we would know that at the increase of the peace of your government, there shall be no end. That every day that someone comes into your kingdom, there's a little more light and a little less darkness. And so, Father, I hope that tonight, by your Spirit, we might catch that sense of your hand working and guiding in history to bring forth the expression of Christianity in all areas of life, and that we might become impassioned to be ambassadors in that way in our day. Pray your blessing on our time this evening. Thank you for each one who's here. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. There is much, probably too much to cover, so we're going to get straight to it. I reminded you, or I told you about Covenant Academy and my Covenant Academy online, so go to covenantacademy.com, check it out, and be excited about the things that are happening right here in Little Idaho. So here's where we at in our course. We're in session 2 of 7. The Chain of Christianity Moves Westward, and I'm especially like this topic, this chain of Christianity moves westward, and I don't know if you've ever thought of it or realized how significant this is, and so I hope that you see this, and I hope that you see that there was a time in the history of this nation that if you were reading a history textbook about this nation, it unashamedly expressed to you that this nation came forth as the Christian idea of man and government bore fruit. And was unashamed in presenting that. And I hope to show you that tonight. All right, so our first leading idea that I want us to think about is this idea of embracing a Christian interpretation of history. And I don't know if you think about this, what is it that makes anything Christian? And to think about, okay, there's history, right? And there's our interpretation of history, what's happening, why it's happening. But how does that interpretation become Christian? A Christian interpretation of history. I don't know if you've ever thought about, well, what does history mean? What is history? Right? What's the definition of history? What does that mean? Noah Webster, in his 1828 dictionary, defines history, and I'm paraphrasing now, but he effectively defines it as a narration of events with their causes and effects. right? So he goes beyond saying it's just not dates and events, but if you really want to know history, you come to understand, well, what causes something to happen and what is the effect of that thing? Right? This is what we mean by history. Well, if we want to have a particularly Christian interpretation of history, we might set two interpretations of history against one another. History is the story of autonomous man. Autonomous just means man self-sufficient. I can do all things for myself and such. Right? So history is the story of autonomous man striving for progress and achievement. That would be one way to interpret history. And all you're looking at is man's efforts to come up out of the goo and walk on two legs and move forward and accomplish, whatever great things we say we've accomplished, going to the moon or whatever, right? Or another way to interpret history would be history as God's plan at work, moving men and nations towards salvation through Christ, and recognizing God's hand in history. So, going way back in America's history, into the 1600s, actually, certainly through the 1700s, and even into the 1800s, it was pretty common that in this country you would have particular sermons preached for different reasons. Like you might have what was called an artillery sermon. And this would be the pastor coming before the newly commissioned officers, and he would preach a sermon about what it means to be a Christian soldier. And he would instruct the new officers and such in the proper way to behave as a Christian soldier. You'd have election day sermons where the minister would, before those who were just elected to office, would preach a sermon. I snicker because I'm just thinking about this happening in our day. Could you imagine if recently elected officials from the state of Idaho would meet here at this church, for example, and the pastor of this church would preach a sermon to them, instructing them in how to be a Christian politician, a Christian statesman? That was pretty commonly done. Well, one of these sermons, you would have, imagine this. Our government would issue a proclamation that we should have a day of prayer and thanksgiving. And so your local minister would prepare his Thanksgiving Day sermon. And it wouldn't be the fourth Thursday in November. It would be whenever, like the second Tuesday in June, or whatever it was. For whatever reason, the government believed that as a nation, we need to pause in prayer and thanksgiving for some blessing. And the pastor would preach a sermon. And the people would say a hearty amen. Well, one of these sermons, a Reverend Foljam, or Foljambi, however you pronounce his name, gave a Christian definition of history. And he talked about various views of history. And then he says something to the effect that history is that ordering of events by God who causes all things to happen after the counsel of his own will. It is the speeding up and the slowing down of events that through history, God's will might be accomplished. And I think and because I'm not quoting it directly, it loses its power. But it's a powerful definition that reminds us that whenever we think about history, and whatever we think about history, and sometimes it's hard because there's some things in history that really trouble us. And yet none of that happens without God's notice, without God's hand of guidance, without it working towards God's glory and God's ultimate purpose for creation. And it's not always easy to, right? I mean, every one of you could think of some event in history that you've studied, that you read about, that's maybe happened during our lifetime. And how could that possibly be any good? Right? How could any good come? How could that be for God's glory? And yet, the Bible tells us that this is the God we serve. He is active in his creation, and he is actively guiding events for his purposes. And sometimes we just don't know. And so we want to embrace this Christian interpretation of history, this interpretation that looks at history as God's plan at work to accomplish his purposes, of which number one would be that he receives all the glory, which is something that the colonists, as they fought for independence, came to recognize, as they would often stand amazed at God's providence in things working out in the manner in which they would work out. Prior to the Revolutionary War, what was called the French and Indian War, George Washington, as an officer in the British Army, at the end of the battle that he led the British to victory, he finds 21 bullet holes in his coat. He had 2 horses shot out from under him. Right? There was an Indian who was interviewed who said, I alone had something like 7 or 9 fair fires at him, he said. And I could not bring him down. And he said, surely this man was being protected by God for some purpose. Well, in fact, the colonists came to view George Washington, they would sometimes refer to him as their Joshua, bringing them to the promised land. It's interesting how often the colonists viewed what was happening as akin to the nation of Israel coming into the promised land. They were that taken with this understanding of history, that God is working out his plan. All right, so there's a first leading idea. Let's embrace a Christian interpretation of history, and we need not be ashamed. The wisdom of God has made foolish the wisdom of the world. We need not be ashamed in any discussion, in any setting, to acknowledge that, well, this is God working in history for these purposes. And of course, others may laugh and snicker and try to ridicule, but we know they do that out of their foolishness. All right, secondly, a second leading idea is acknowledging the chain of Christianity, carrying the Christian idea of man westward. Remember, last time we talked about this Christian idea of man and government that emerges with the coming of Christ and brings this understanding of the independent value of the person separate from the state. He's not just a piece of the machinery of the state for the aggrandizement, the building up of the state. Okay? In fact, I think this is from 1880, if you took a physical geography course, right? Everybody's got to take geography at some point. If you took a geography course in the early 1900s even, you would encounter, apparently I missed a page. First, let me, before I do that, let me mention here this, what we call the chain of Christianity. This chain of Christianity represented here may be a little bit difficult to see, but if you can pick out the Middle East there, just to the kind of right of Africa, right? And we got chain links that go up through Europe and come across through America. And then the idea is that this chain would be continued around the globe. The idea being that if we look at the history of Christianity, its greatest spread and influence from, say, Israel ends up being westward into Europe, and then from Europe to the east coast of America. And from there, it spreads across America as the United States of America fills out. And it becomes America's place to spread the ideas of Christianity throughout the world. Now, we know historically, I don't know how well we're doing on this today, but we know that historically, the United States has been the nation that has sent missionaries to the world. The missionary activity from this nation has far exceeded what other nations have done. That's part of spreading the gospel. But spreading the gospel, and we know this to be true, that as we become Christians, it's not just that, okay, I'm a Christian and then nothing else matters. We know that it matters how we live. We're to be disciples, right? We are to be observing all things that Christ commanded. There is a way that we are to live. Paul tells us that we are to walk in the way that we found as we came to Christ. We're to continue in that way. We are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. We are to grow in the grace and the faith. All of these things. And that becomes a multifaceted task. And I would argue that even that form of government and the way in which that government operates becomes a living witness and testimony to the Christian faith, if it be based in the Christian idea of man and government. In fact, I would even argue that when we come down to economics, we can experience the gospel message just in any transaction. When we exchange, when we make that exchange, and I give up my precious dollar for whatever trinket I'm buying at the dollar store. And I walk away from that, and I look at the person and I say, thank you. And the cashier looks at me and says, thank you. And nobody's a loser. We're both winners in that exchange because we both received something that we believe to be more valuable than the thing that we gave up. It's the beauty of the free market, something that is quickly fading away. Probably the only place we experience the free market today is eBay and garage sales. It's probably it. The rest is so managed. But it's a wonderful thing. In fact, it harkens to the great exchange. Christ giving up his place in heaven, exchanging that to become a man on earth. Why? That we would forever and eternally say, thank you, because he saved us in that action. And that's what every economic exchange in the marketplace is a picture of. And this is all part of this Christian interpretation of history, economics, and government, and whatever subject it would be. So we have our chain of Christianity. You'll see this better once I get this posted online, and you can go get this PowerPoint. But around the outsides would be the names of people or events that would stand as links on this chain of Christianity. All right. So let me take you to your early 1900s geography class, and you would see a map like this. And this map is illustrating the different river basins in the United States. And as Arnold Guyot, the author of this physical geography book, one of the most prominent physical geography textbooks in its day, he writes this as he explains the appearance of the North American continent. And he writes this: evidently, this continent, speaking of America, was not designed to give birth and development to a new civilization, but to receive one ready-made. And a reason that he says this is when you look at the United States, the right coast, East Coast, is pretty welcoming coastline. Whereas the left coast, pretty harsh coastline, right? It's almost, you hit it and you go straight up. I mean, it's a very different coastline, right? And so he uses this as an example to demonstrate how people coming from Europe would be welcomed by kind of this low coastline that would be gradually appearing and they could enter into. And these rivers, abundant rivers, that they could navigate and come into the inlands. And so he says, this continent wasn't designed to give birth and development to a new civilization, but to receive one ready-made, and to furnish to the cultivated race of the old world the scene most worthy of their activity. He concludes this section regarding the physical characteristics of America. He concludes this section by writing, "Its vast plains, overflowing with natural wealth, are turned towards Europe. Its largest rivers discharge into the Atlantic, while its lofty mountains and less fertile lands are removed far towards its western shores. Thus it seems to invite the Indo-European race, the people of progress, to new fields of action, to encourage their expansion throughout its entire territory and their fusion into one nation, while it opens for them a pathway to all the nations of the earth." You see, Arnold Guyot didn't look at history as just a bunch of chance happenings and the continents just haphazardly scattered on the face of the earth. He saw God's hand of design. I mean, before he talks about America in his text, he talks about Asia as a continent of birth of civilization, Europe as the continent of development of civilization, and then America, ready to receive and be the culmination of what was happening as the Christian idea of man and government moved westward. So, as he's writing about what he calls the continents of history, he concludes this way. Each continent has, therefore, a well-defined individuality. Remember, we talked about the principle of individuality last week. The idea of Adam calling the animals by name. But he's calling out the uniqueness. And Arnold Guyot takes that principle of individuality and he sees it in the continents of the earth. Why? Because he recognizes the hand of a designer. So each continent has, therefore, a well-defined individuality which fits it for a special function. The fullness of nature's life is typified by Africa with its superabundant wealth and power of animal life. You ever thought about any continent this way? That God shows forth an aspect of his character just in the fact that God is the source of abundant life. When you look at a continent like Africa, which has an abundance of life, animal life to it. I mean, who thinks this way? Well, I want to suggest that's the way we should think as those who adopt, who embrace a Christian interpretation of history. South America with its exuberance of vegetation, and Australia with its antiquated forms of plants and animals, right? Australia got all the weird ones, right? So I guess God does have a sense of humor. I don't. He writes on, in the grand drama of man's life and development, Asia, Europe, and America played distinct parts for which each seems to have been admirably prepared. And then I love his last paragraph in this section. Listen carefully. Truly, no blind force gave our earth the forms so well adapted to perform these functions. The conclusion is irresistible that the entire globe is a grand organism, every feature of which is the outgrowth of a definite plan of the all-wise Creator for the education of the human family and the manifestation of his own glory. I suggest to you that if we really care about the environment, nature, protecting, this is the view that drives us to the proper view of how to care for the garden that God has placed us in. You see, for Guyot, history, well-planned and conducted by an all-wise Creator, required a stage as carefully crafted by that same all-wise Creator. Regarding America, the quote that's on the screen here, America, therefore, with her cultured and progressive people and her social organization, founded upon the principle of equality and brotherhood of all mankind, seems destined to furnish the most complete expression of the Christian civilization and to become the fountain of a new and higher life for all the races of men. You know, it's this kind of view that is ennobling. It is this kind of view that fills people with real dignity, because it recognizes that we're not just stuff formed from the goo, but we are carefully crafted by the hand of a wise creator who knows us, who brought us forth at this time for a purpose. And that forever changes how we think and view not just history, but also future history, history to come. It forever changes it. All right, so this theme that we see here in Arnold Guyot's Physical Geography, we're going to go back to our friend Charles Bancroft, The Footprints of Time. We quoted from him last week. We want to return to Bancroft and see in his history how he recognizes the very same ideas. We read here, America was reserved designedly for so many ages to furnish a suitable and unencumbered location for the central halls and mightiest pillars of the completed structure. Our fathers cleared the ground and laid the foundation deep on the living rock, that is to say, on human rights, that they seldom failed to place stone, pillar, and column in just position. The work, as we find it, proves, and we have little to do but to clear away the rubbish, beautify the grounds, and put the whole to its proper use. You know, in the book of Hebrews, I think it is, it tells us that as Christians, we're to understand that we are part of the, I think it says, the better covenant. In other words, the reason why the author of Hebrews says this is that Christ has sent his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, to live within us. And because we have the Holy Spirit within us, we have it better than those who came before. I want to suggest to you that being born in this place, this nation, by God's providence, which has the wonderfully blessed heritage of having a government that was formed upon Christian ideas, there's not a lot of work that we were supposed to have to do. We just needed to polish the pillars, right? We needed to cut back the overgrowth so that that structure that our founding fathers put in place would stand visible and strong as that city of light on a hill that William Bradford of the Pilgrims so desired would be established here on this continent. This is what Bancroft is suggesting here. The structure of which he speaks, he calls the grand temple of civilization, which each nation and age in history played a part in building. For Bancroft, he understood Greece and Rome as being the nations that furnished the noble outline which the nations of modern Europe perfected. But here it is that Bancroft sees that in America, a solid foundation, we've dug down to this solid foundation, this living rock, what he terms here human rights, which perhaps can come across a little bit odd given the way we think about, or the way human rights is spoken of today. But you see, for Bancroft, in talking about what America has established here, he goes on to say, there is little doubt that the spirit and true sense of our Declaration of Independence will finally mold the structure and control the workings of all governments. Okay, so here's Charles Bancroft, 1880. And it apparently is still the dream and the vision of those in this nation, that this Declaration of Independence, the sense of it, the ideas embodied in that declaration, would become the ideas of all governments of the earth. Right? So this is 1776, 1880, 100 years later. This idea that from America would come forth the ideas of government that would forever change governments across the world. Now, in our day and age, we have justices on our Supreme Court who think it proper to not only look at case law as precedent in this nation, but look at case law in other nations as precedent to make their decisions. I mean, it's bad enough when they look at case law in this nation because they're not supposed to be doing that. They're determining the constitutionality of an issue. So what do they look to? Well, the Constitution and the understanding of the Constitution, right? And yet we have Supreme Court justices who are very vocal about, well, I look at case law from other nations. Well, you know what other nations have? A constitution that's different. Constitutional thinking, if they even have constitutional thinking, but ideas of government that are very different than our ideas. I mean, it's not unlike when the children of Israel say, we want a king like all the other nations around us. They're looking to the other nations, right? We want to be like them when God has said, I don't want you to be like them. I want you to be a peculiar people to me. So Bancroft makes this connection between human rights that he speaks of here and the Declaration of Independence. And so these human rights of which he speaks, found in our Declaration, are clearly the most powerful words perhaps in the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Well, every time I read that, I think back to my radical econ class. I think I mentioned the professor who loved Karl Marx. By the way, that professor, Pete Lichtenstein, I liked him. He was a good guy. I loved to sit and just talk with him. We imagined people eventually, with all the pollution, people evolving gills, and we would wear bowls of water on our head to breathe. I know, anyway. But, you know, I enjoyed sitting and talking with him. If he wasn't such a communist, I could call him friend, you know. That's kind of weird, right? Anyway, I don't know if you recall Tiananmen Square, right, that incident. He was actually in China when Tiananmen Square happened. Even that did not dissuade him, apparently, from his love of Marx. That's kind of sad. But anyway, in the radical econ class, one of the students in that class, I can remember this vividly. Somehow we got on the Declaration and talking about this statement. And he actually said, well, you know, you read that, that is one of the most humanistic statements that's ever been made. And I looked at it and, really? What? And I said, quite the contrary. It's clearly one of the most religious statements that has ever been uttered by any in politics. Endowed by their Creator? I mean, it was an odd moment in that class, but, you know, the Marxists in there were convinced that it was nothing but a statement of humanism. Anyway, I think it's clear, our Declaration is clear, that these inalienable rights that we enjoy are granted to us by God and are to be exercised in accordance with His commands for the purpose of bringing glory to Him. And so, this serves as a really wonderful reminder. If you dare to take up the challenge of And you know, it's never been easier to do this. If you just type in books.google.com, and then you type in Charles Bancroft, for example, you'll see a bunch of his works pop up. And you can look at them online. Now, I know we're being monitored, everything we do online, but that's okay. I don't mind that they know that I'm one of these radicals. But if you dare to take up that challenge, I want you to remember, you cannot take contemporary definitions of terms and apply them to those same terms when you read historically. Okay? You've got to understand those terms in their days. So you have to do some extra reading, and I would encourage you to make use of the Webster's 1828 dictionary, the finest dictionary produced. But I want you to hear the contrast, all right? So Bancroft talks about these human rights. He connects it to the Declaration of Independence, which clearly tells us rights granted us by God. Implication, if God has given them to you, he is the one that can tell you how you are to use them, right? Not anybody else. God tells you this. If you want to use them correctly, use them the way that God says. Well, consider this, paragraph 3 of Article 29 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which says, these rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So the Declaration of Human Rights that the United Nations declares, some of them seemingly quite nice, quite good. But there's a caveat. If you're going to use them, you got to use them the way we say. The United Nations speaking. Well, that's interesting. If they're saying they get to say how you use them, they're saying these rights effectively come from us. What a contrast. What a contrast to that which establishes the governmental thinking in this nation. So, this is a somewhat lengthy quote, in fact. Yes, it fits up there. Barely. Because when we arrive at our declaration with its enshrinement of that great truth regarding inalienable rights, it brings us back to John Locke. You remember we mentioned John Locke last week. And John Locke speaks of the reason for men joining in society with others. And he speaks of the mutual preservation of their life, liberty, and property. And so if we look at our excerpt here, if man in the state of nature be so free as has been said, why will he part with his freedom? I mean, you think about it. If you ended up on a deserted island all by yourself, you're totally free. Right? It's your property. You can do what you want. You're free to do anything you want, and you're not violating anybody else's freedoms, right? But the moment somebody else shows up on that island with you, you might be happy for the companionship, but now you got to set down some rules. That was my coconut, right? You don't touch my coconut, right? I mean, so why would, here's what John Locke asks, why would somebody say, I would rather live in companionship and be willing to give up freedom? He says, to which it is obvious to answer that though in the state of nature he has such a right, yet the enjoyment of it is very uncertain and constantly exposed to the invasion of others. This makes him willing to quit a condition which, however free, is full of fears and continual dangers and is not without reason. You recognize that once we join together with somebody else, there's a sense of security that we gain from that. We're together in this. I can help you, you can help me. I mean, it's like when you move into a new neighborhood and you become friends with your immediate next door neighbor, and you get this sense of, okay, so I can trust them to watch over my property when I'm not here. And I'm glad to watch over their property when they're not here. And you get that sense of security, right? Now, you have to put up with the fact that somebody's watching your property, right? I mean, it's not a big issue, right? You have to put up with whatever issues come along with developing that relationship. Nosy neighbors, right? Constantly at your door. Constantly inviting themselves over. Staying too late. And, whatever. All right. So, it is not without reason then that he seeks out and is willing to join in society with others who are already united, to have a mind to unite for the mutual preservation of their lives, liberties, and estates, which I call by the general name property. And so this idea of preservation is what John Locke gets at. The act of preserving or keeping safe. In our declaration, instead of using the word preservation, it uses the word to secure, right? To secure these liberties, governments are instituted among men. As James Madison would say it, if men were angels, we wouldn't need civil government. But because men are not angels, right? And so men unite in society for the common good of protection. Our declaration uses that word secure. To secure means, and here I'm quoting from my Webster's 1828. To secure means to guard effectually from danger, to make safe, to make certain, to put beyond hazard. Liberty and fixed laws secure to every citizen due protection of person and property. Let me just repeat that for a moment. See if you can think about any events in the last couple of years in the news. Liberty and fixed laws secure to every citizen due protection of person and property. Because I can think of events in our recent history where individuals did not have protection of their property. But because of the wishes and desires of a select few, they actually lost their property because they wouldn't make a particular kind of wedding cake, or they wouldn't take photos at a particular type of event. You see, those laws were not protective of their property. We had laws that were invasive of their property, damaging to their property. Webster goes on in his definition of to secure, and he says the first duty, this is one of the reasons I love Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, because he gives these little one-sentence sermons in his definitions. The first duty of the highest interest of men is to secure the favor of God by repentance and faith. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, if we would just read Webster's 1828 definitions, we would never escape a Christian view of anything. Just to let you know, while Webster was working on that definition, he became a Christian. And the way he would work on this, he had a big horseshoe desk, and he was more or less acquainted with some 25, 26 different languages. I barely get by with English. I speak it well enough to order in the better restaurants. But anyway, and so he would take a word and he would work his way around his table. And he says in his own journals that he came to this point where he was trying to work around his table, and he would suddenly be affected with this sense of guilt and troublesome, and he would sit and, what is this about? And he would try to return, and finally it just came to him. He realized, I'm in desperate need of salvation. And so while he was working on his dictionary, that he came to a saving knowledge of Christ. And his 1828 dictionary really does become a dictionary to the Bible in many ways, because he will put different definitions for a term based upon different uses of that word in the Bible. It's tremendous. Now, some of the words you have to take into account the times. For example, well, I don't know if this is the time, but the word dull, I mean, it shows you have a sense of humor, because for the word dull, he gives this little one sentence. sermon. The making of dictionaries is very dull work, he said. So he was probably feeling tired at that point. But the word preposterous, okay, just take his definitions in context, because in that definition, preposterous, I think we all know what that means, right? That's just preposterous. It's like, that's not reasonable, right? It's preposterous, it's wild, it's outside the bounds of what would be accepted. So his one-sentence sermon, I just have to share this. His one-sentence sermon is to entrust the hands of to trust a Republican government to the hands of a woman is preposterous. Just take it in context, please. Okay, don't judge him. Don't judge him. It's kind of a humorous definition, though. All right, anyway, or use of the word. All right. So to secure these things is to make sure that they are guarded from danger, that they're made safe. And that's a reason or a purpose. In fact, in our declaration, that is the stated purpose of government, to secure us in our exercise of our life, our liberty, and in our declaration it says pursuit of happiness. When you read history, really the phrase was life, liberty, property, and no stamps. That's what they wanted. Life, liberty, property, and no stamps. That was their cry. That was their motto. All right, let's return to this idea of this chain of Christianity. You see, when we look at the history of the world, we recognize that it really can be seen in terms of the freedom and progress of individual man. In fact, for a large time in history, a lot of history is just trying to get food, right? Or meat. Right? I mean, who wants some meat, right? And, about the time that the poor plebes or whatever have some technology where they can be a little more productive with food, they got a king who's just taking it all away before they can have any of it, right? So they're still, we just want some food. Right? I mean, that's a lot of what history is about. But there's this push for not being under the thumb of some self-declared superior, right? I mean, that's clear in history. In fact, you go all the way back to the children of Israel in captivity, and I mean, that's one thing that you can understand there is that they were burdened by their captivity. They truly were slaves in their captivity. They wanted to be free from that burden. They wanted freedom. Now, the larger picture, of course, is their captivity in Egypt is a picture of our captivity in sin. Egypt being sin, Pharaoh being Satan himself, picture-wise, I'm saying. Moses being the deliverer, right, a type of Christ, setting them free from the bonds of sin. But in political terms, right? I mean, if we could just talk to those people, Sherman set the way back. There we go. We talked to him. What do you want? I just want to be free. I want to be able to work and enjoy the fruits of my labor. Well, they'd probably speak in Hebrew or something, but we'd have a translation device, right? Indeed, history records that the necessary condition for man to enjoy freedom and have opportunity to progress is found in his spiritual condition. This is what we tried to emphasize last week, that when this Christian idea of man and government emerged on the scene, this is when people began to understand, I can be at liberty. There's liberty to be had. I want this. I don't know if you've, for those of us who got to live through the Cold War and Ronald Reagan's famous, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. I don't know if you've ever heard, although the guy's a little bit kooky, but quite some time ago, Glenn Beck had a kind of testimonial to Ronald Reagan. Okay? And in that testimonial to Ronald Reagan, he actually had interviews of people from Poland who were able to hear Ronald Reagan say those words because of Radio Free America and the radio signal leaking into Poland. And to a person, they talked about how meaningful it was to them that someone who had liberty was willing to stand up and fight for their liberty. It's these moments where oppressed people get a taste of liberty that they understand there's something so much better. And it is critically important that our missionaries dig into places and preach the gospel of grace because it is ultimately the only thing that saves. But it truly becomes a picture of the gospel message when politically people come to understand they can break free from bondage and enter into liberty. And it is in that moment that we can capture that and say, you experience that politically. Let me talk about the more important bondage from which we need to be broken free. This is how God works in history. This is how peoples and nations come to salvation. Greece and Rome are regarded as the highest civilizations which men have ever produced, yet both failed. Why? Well, ultimately, these civilizations were built upon the ideals of men lacking the necessary foundation to endure the innate wickedness of those same men. Their fatal omission, and that which is basic to a republican form of government, and again, I don't mean Republican Party, okay, is that which is clearly represented in the profound yet simple precepts of Jesus Christ. So with this movement of the chain of Christianity, we see the development and advancement of liberty within civilizations. And so Bancroft writes, as America is the common ground on which all the currents and ideas of all the civilizations meet, so also it is the point from which return currents, hastened by lightning and by steam, seek again every quarter of the earth with kindly greetings to renew the relations broken in the original separation of the races and to cement by exchanges mutually profitable a new and better unity of mankind. That's a long sentence. What is he saying? Here's something that is really critical, I think, that Bancroft brings out, that we've forgotten in our day. It is clear from America's history that this idea of bring us your poor, your tired, your huddled masses, the idea was not bring them here and our welfare state will pay for them and take care of them. Because what Bancroft is saying here, and this is 1880, okay? What Bancroft is saying here is that here's the big idea of America. You got trouble in your nation? Come on over and learn here what it means to be a self-governed people. Learn it and practice it here. And then go back home and plant those seeds where you are. You see, the big idea of America was that we would not be the only nation of liberty, the only nation of a government that its purpose was to secure those rights, but that we would be that place where people from all over the world could learn and practice these ideas and take them back home, restore or build for the first time good and right government where they live, and in so doing, unite all mankind. But what are we told today? Oh, no, it's not the American way to say certain people shouldn't be allowed into the country. I mean, that just, of course, denies all the history of presidents who actually issued restrictions on immigration at various times for various reasons. The fact that, in fact, one of the biggest concerns in this country shortly after we became a country under our Constitution was the Jacobins from France. There's huge debate about this politically malevolent group. And in fact, I came across, of all things, a sermon that was preached on 4th of July in I'm going to say the 1820s. May have been earlier than that. Well, it really struck me because when I came across this sermon, it was during the most recent presidential campaign, and there was one particular candidate who was very struck with the idea of making America great again. What was interesting about this sermon is that this pastor was preaching a sermon about how do we keep America great. And I thought, well, how appropriate, right? I mean, well, let's see if they agree. The current candidate and they didn't. The pastor was very concerned about these Jacobins he viewed them as agents of Satan coming into this country to deceive people away from the Christian faith, which was critical to maintain if America were to stay great. And he called for a travel ban. He didn't use those words. He was calling for a travel ban on Jacobins from France for that reason. Noah Webster actually had the same concerns, those Jacobins of France. In fact, see, Noah Webster really did have the same concerns because Noah Webster, who's often termed the father of American education, he actually said, in order to ensure the maintenance of our republican institutions of government, the children must be instructed first in the principles of the Christian religion. Now, when I took my education course at Boise State and I pointed that out, I was laughed down. You can't believe that. That was just the hegemony of his day. They love to use these things. That was just the hegemony of his day. That's just the way people talked then. And I said, exactly. That's the way people talked then. That's the way people thought then. Well, what's wrong with us? Why don't you go sit in the corner? Sorry. I did have fun in college. All right, so when Bancroft is talking about this idea of seeking again every quarter of the earth with kindly greetings to renew the relations broken in the original separation of the races, to bring about new and better unity of mankind, this is the idea. Take the ideas that we've developed here, learn them well, and take them back home and put them into place. You see, some people would be very, very bothered by these presentations. They would think that, oh, what you're saying is that Christianity equals America. And that's not what's being said at all. The principles of Christianity were applied in America, but these same principles of Christian idea of man and government could be applied anywhere. And they should be applied everywhere. And America has a heritage that's not unlike the nation of Israel, who received the oracles of God, and it was for the purpose of expressing those throughout all the nations, right? They dropped the ball. This is why Christ comes and says, it's got to be taken from you. Right? This is why Paul, when he starts preaching and the Jews won't listen to him, he goes to the Gentiles because they'll listen. They'll hear the good news. America was to do the same thing. We've largely dropped the ball. We haven't become the nation that inspires other nations to that which is truly good and right before God. We ought to. We need to again. He says, as the heart in the human body receives the current of blood from all parts of the system, and having revitalized it, returns it with fresh elements of strength, so America adopts the children of all lands only to return a manhood ennobled by a sense of its own dignity through the practice of a system of self-government. This is powerful stuff. Why is it that anyone should want to come to this nation from another nation? To practice self-government, to have dignity ennobled, to become a man and return to their homeland and build good and right government where they live. This was the idea. This was, if you remember that image of the chain, this is completing the chain around the world. But what have we become? Come on over, we've got health care, we've got welfare. You can get benefits here. You might even get a free cell phone. Come on over. Plant yourself here. And live off the good, the accumulated wealth of all those people who've gone before. And just consume it. Just consume it and consume it. And pretty soon we'll fight over the scraps. Notice what Bancroft sees in regard to America. It is a short-sighted view of America to view her as a place where others come to simply be merged into a mass of humanity that pursues special entitlement and benefit from a welfare state. Nothing in that is ennobling to man. Rather, those who would come to America would mature in the concepts of liberty secured through the practice of self-government. This would improve the condition of each as he enters into the manhood rooted in a sense of his own dignity. We've replaced dignity with entitlement. We just feel entitled. And every time a new window opens up with more entitlements, we get in line. Entitle me, entitle me. And there's nothing dignifying in that whatsoever. I don't know what your family history is like. My mom's dad, my grandfather, was a man of dignity. And there was nothing, I mean, in the eyes of the world, there was no superstar or anything. He was a man of the earth. He got his hands dirty. He grew his crops. But there was one thing he would not do. You see, he and his wife, my grandmother, as far as I know, no Christian history in their families. And they faced a very difficult time, and there was a Christian lady who offered them like a shack for a place to live. And that brought them to the Lord. And from that moment, they never wavered in that. Even to the point that my grandfather would refuse to have any harvesting of his fields done on Sundays. You just don't do it. It's the Lord's day. And he would be ridiculed in his small town. You got to get your crops, so you better get those crops in. Well, it's Sunday, we can't do that work. You're going to lose crops, but he was faithful to that conviction. You see, he was a man of dignity. He didn't think of entitlement. Well, I'm entitled to those crops, so the Lord will understand, and I'll just go ahead and do it anyway. He had this conviction that this was how he was to conduct himself as a believer. And he walked in it, and in the eyes of this little boy looking at his granddad, a man of dignity. And we miss those kind of people in our country today. Those kind of people who, for conviction, say, no, I won't walk in that way. No, I won't do this thing now. We rationalize. We find reasons. You know, and I'll just accept it. I know I'm judgmental as a Christian. I apologize. We get very worked up about particular sins that we might hear about within the church. But quite honestly, we're pretty casual about the consistency with which some professing believers assemble themselves together with believers. Right? For some believers, you may be thinking of someone now there can be several Sundays that pass before they're back. And what is happening? Now, granted, I mean, there can be a legitimate reason. I don't misunderstand, right? But forsaking the assembling together is serious business. The scriptures would seem to indicate. We need to become all the more people of this kind of dignity, especially in a day and age where the flood of wickedness is so high. The standards must be raised that much higher. We don't need to be more complacent regarding the wickedness around us. The standard must be all the higher so it can be seen, right? We're going to be all the more diligent about our faith and our walk, our life. And I would suggest to you, it goes all the way to our citizenship here, our second citizenship, if you will. All right, I'm way off topic now. Sorry. All right. America then will colonize ideas extensively when her institutions are thoroughly mature. This is, again, Bancroft. All the past has contributed to the excellence of her foundation. Modern Europe has supplied her with the most desirable building material, both of ideas and of men. Without Asia, Greece, and Rome, there would have been a very imperfect modern Europe. And without modern Europe, America must have begun at the beginning with all the lessons, discoveries, and discipline of thousands of years to learn. Happily, we seem authorized to believe that. Just stop for a moment and appreciate his use of language, right? What he's saying is when you read history and you see the development through Rome, Greece, and into modern Europe, we seem authorized to believe. God in history has said, it is right for you to believe this. We seem authorized to believe that as she concludes the possible great migrations of humanity, she has so well learned the lessons of experience to have given due flexibility and capacity of improvement to all her institutions, listen to this carefully, and when necessary, can reconstruct herself within herself. Think about what that means. To reconstruct is to construct again, right? That means it was there once. We got to rebuild it. So America can rebuild herself within herself. Everything we need. Here we are with a crumbled America. Let's just accept my premise, okay? You may think America's wonderful. It's still a pretty cool place. But America struggles today, right? What Bancroft is suggesting is everything we need to rebuild America, should that be the case, we've got right here. It's here. We got to find it. Like the king of Israel, who was presented with the law, and he said, "What? Why haven't we known about this law?" And he declares the law to be read to restore Israel to its goodness, right? We've got the same thing. We've got it here. Let's not lose it. You see, before Al Gore invented the internet, what? You didn't know? Currently, he's on a mission to save the planet, too. Anyway, there became a huge concern among Christian historians that Christian history was being destroyed. Not just set aside, but actually manuscripts and such were being lost or purposely lost. In the age of the internet comes along this, and I'm not singing the praises of this company, all right? There's issues with them. But comes along this company, Google, right? And because they're so fascinated with technology, one of the things that strikes them to do is to digitize books. Well, there's a limit to what you can really digitize because some books are still copyrighted. So in their passion to work out this technology, what's there to digitize? Old books. old books of American history. And they are plentiful on the internet. They're there. We can search them. I would challenge you, do this, okay? There's something called Evans Imprint. I don't have the website for it, but if you just search for Evans Imprint, it is a collection of everything that was published on this continent from, forgive me if I get these dates wrong, but roughly the late 1600s up to the early 1800s, something like that, maybe late 1700s. Like, it seems like about the first 150 years. Everything that was published. And some of it's just like crazy. I mean, they actually had lotteries back. I don't really know that. Thomas Jefferson actually put on a lottery to raise funds for the government. Who knew? I think the top prize was a brand new rifle, I think, if I remember. Of course, back then in colonial days, there was a law that you had to be armed, and if you didn't have a weapon, the town would pay for a weapon for you. Of course, you were the militia, right? I mean, you'd have to come out and every hour often, go through your drills. You have to prove that you could load your musket, right? Whatever. Anyway, but it's wonderful. I mean, you can just browse, okay? And I mean, what I'll do is, sometimes I'm pretty idiotic, I guess, but I'll go to a random letter generator on the internet. And I'll have it generate a letter of the alphabet. I say, okay, so I'll go to if it comes up M, I'll go to the M's. And I'll just randomly pick an M last name author and begin reading. It's fascinating what you will find. It's amazing. It's inspiring. It's our history. I mean, it is the equivalent, but even more so than this whole DNA thing that we talked about before. It's who we are. You don't know what America is supposed to be? Go read these things. It's amazing what you read. It's amazing how much they cared about Christianity prevailing, not to the point of you can't have any other religion in this country. That wasn't it at all. But what kind of a person would think, they would say, that in a nation whose laws are based on Christianity, we're going to adjust those laws for your religion? You're welcome to practice your religion, Mr. Jew or whoever, but don't expect the businesses to be open on Sunday. We have Christian laws here. That's not a slam against you. I mean, obviously I'm talking not the way they talked, because they talk much better, but it's not a slam against you. This is who we are. And be thankful that you've got this place where you're free to exercise your Jewish faith, because as Christians, we don't come and harass you to convert away from your Jewish faith. We'll talk to you about it. We'll try to be winsome, right? Persuade you with the gospel. All right. Okay, so America then will colonize ideas extensively when our institutions are thoroughly matured. Without Asia, Greece, and Rome, imperfect modern Europe. Without modern Europe, America must have begun at the beginning. She can reconstruct herself within herself. This fills me with hope. America is not lost. What we need, we have. We just have to dig it out, and we have to apply it. Well, he talked about this ennobling of manhood through self-government. Well, what's so critical about self-government? Well, John Locke said, to understand political power right and derive it from its original, we must consider what state all men are naturally in, and that is a state of perfect freedom to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons as they think fit, within the bounds of the law of nature. Within the bounds of the law of nature. Right? So when John Locke says the law of nature, and this is something that you'd want to read through and understand. When they talk about the law of nature, they're just not talking about some ambiguous kind of thing out there. It's not biological or evolutionary. The law of nature is God's law in nature. That's what it is. And so he's saying that to if any of us would desire to get back to our original state, we would be at that state where we're free to do as we would like within the bounds of God's law. And you see, this is what self-government brings us back to as closely as possible. Being self-governed means I can get as close as possible to living in that original state where I'm free to conduct myself the way I would choose within the bounds of God's law. James Wilson, signer of the Declaration, said this, and a justice on the Supreme Court as well. In a moral view, self-government increases, instead of impairing, the security, the liberty, and the dignity of man. In a political view, self-government increases, instead of impairing, the security, the liberty, and the dignity of the citizen. You see how James Wilson is pulling on those same ideas of security, liberty, the dignity. How do those things increase? Through self-government. I want you to think about it this way. For sake of time, I'm going to have to. Where is it? Just a moment. You can see I've got a lot of notes here, don't you? Wait. All right, I guess I don't have it. We'll go here. All right, so this idea of self-government, increasing the security, liberty, and dignity of the man and citizen. This really is the Christian idea of man applied. As Christians, we understand the importance of the change in state of being one under the curse of the law to becoming one who is filled by the grace of Christ because of the work of the Holy Spirit, thereby being equipped to fulfill the law. It is a self-evident truth that as individuals we enjoy the greatest amount of liberty when we practice the best self-government. And I'm supposed to have a different slide in here, and I don't. I must have deleted it. So, let me just tell you what that slide would be. In Genesis chapter 2, Adam is instructed in the garden. And God says, you may eat freely of every tree of the garden. They're all yours. But of one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat. For the day when you eat of it, you shall surely die. This is the instruction that's given to Adam. What that tells us is that Adam is given the opportunity by God to exercise self-government. And the way that God works is he says, you can enjoy the greatest amount of liberty if you'll just govern yourself in one small area. It was just one tree. Right? And it's not like that was the only tree in the garden. God said, hey, I gave you a garden, you got one tree, you can't touch it. Looks beautiful, looks good, juicy fruit, can't touch it. It's not what God said. He said, you can enjoy every tree in the garden. Look at them all, Adam. They're all yours. Enjoy. Eat away. But there's this one tree right here. It's reserved for me. You can't touch it. Adam, govern yourself in this one small area. And think about it. As long as Adam governs himself about that one tree, he's got the security and the liberty of the whole garden. It's all his. And he knows every day he wakes up, I just govern myself about that one tree. I'm secure in the garden. I've got the liberty of all the trees of the garden. No wonder he would be filled with dignity, right? Look at me. I've got it all. I just govern myself about that one tree. That one tree. That one tree that looks good for food, right? It looks like it would make one wise, doesn't it? Well, you know the story, right? He fails. And what happens? He loses the security of the garden. I don't know if you've ever thought about what night one was like outside the garden. Eve, what did you do? right? You just imagine the conversation in that cave. Right? I mean, they're probably some dripping cave. It's just cold and dank. And what do we do? It was your fault. No, it wasn't. It's your fault. You never told me. No, I did. I don't know. I just can't imagine what that would be like. So this is how the other half lives. I mean, it's just like, what? Oh my, horrid, right? But as long as they govern themselves, security, liberty, dignity, right? And that's what God says to us today. Think about it. There's been a lot of social unrest in recent years in this country, right? And in fact, we've watched social unrest on television, and one of the chants that has gone up is, this is what democracy looks like. And they're not wrong. That is what democracy looks like. That's why we don't want it. We don't want democracy. The founding fathers hated the idea of democracy. What did they want? They wanted a republic, a nation of law in which law begins with God. The power flows to the individual, through the individual to elected representatives who are elected. Why? Not because they'll do my will, but because they'll do what is right in the eyes of God. Think about how many times we hear people, well, who am I going to vote for? I'm going to vote for him because I like what he's promising to give. That was never to be a consideration for a representative. Right? I vote for a person. Why? Because they have the character to not give. You know what I'm saying? Wouldn't that be interesting? You elect me to office, and I'll give you nothing. Vote for me. You get nothing. But on the other hand, I'll take nothing. That's pretty interesting now. Well, this is pretty interesting. This principle of liberty, this principle of government, this idea of being self-governed. And isn't that, what's amazing is, isn't that what we want as parents? Right? We want our children to be able to govern themselves. Well, the goal is not that our children know our voice and they know to quit doing something. The goal is that they would know not to do it without us saying anything, right? If you've ever been a parent of a child, it is a moment of great joy when you see your child make a wise choice and not do. Right? They didn't put their hand on the hot stove by their own choice, right? It's like, you are such a self-governed little kid. Most of the time, you're just a flaming liberal socialist. I don't know what, but hey, that was impressive. Give me more of it, right? All right. Oh, by the way, preamble to an early American Bill of Rights. Look at this here. The free fruition of such liberties, immunities, and privileges as humanity, civility, and Christianity call for, as due to every man in his place and proportion, without impeachment or infringement, has ever been and ever will be the tranquility and stability of churches and commonwealths. Whoever thought government cares about the tranquility of churches? Well, absolutely. A government that's wise, because they know that the best in government derives from Christian principles. And so you want happy churches. Because when you have happy churches, guess what? They're proclaiming the gospel message. They're preaching peace. And as a ruler, what's more pleasant than a peaceful community, right? This is the preamble to the Massachusetts Liberties of 1641, colonial America. This is what they cared about. We want to make sure that churches are at peace. They're not pressured, badly influenced by government officials. We want them to be at peace to preach the gospel. We want them to be at peace to preach the message that needs to be preached, to call representatives to account for how they perform their office. Don't judge. Sorry. All right. I'm going to have to wrap up. And I think I'm not all the way through my slides. Look at what Frothingham says here. It is easy to see that this development of individual freedom was, I love this development of individual freedom was quietly undermining the old paternal theory of government. Okay, paternal, fatherly, right? Parental, right? I remember when Bill Clinton was running against Bush #1, right? And they had this town hall, and some ponytailed guy stands up and he looks at Bill Clinton and he says, "Mr. Clinton, we're your children. How are you going to take care of us?" I wish I had a pair of scissors to just cut that ponytail right off. I mean, what kind of a question is that? I mean, this is not the question of American history. At no point did our founding fathers think, oh, how will this government take care of us, its children? Oh, what did they say? Government is a dangerous thing. George Washington, government is like a fire. If you do not control it, it will rage. I mean, they looked at government as the child that needs to be disciplined and chained down with the chains of the Constitution, Jefferson said. I love this. This development of individual freedom was quietly undermining the old paternal theory of government. Quit looking to civil government as a parent. This was based on the idea that the body of the people do not possess the capacity to take care of their own personal concerns, but require to be controlled in their dress, diet, business, opinion. Isn't that our country today? That sounds familiar. It does. You can't think like that. Right? Oh, don't you be a bully, or we'll bully you. I mean, it's like, what? Let's bully the bullies, you know? Okay. Yeah. I remember one guy said, and look, bullying is bad, okay? Don't be a bully, right? Well, one guy said, back in the day, the guy's bullying you, you agree to meet outside behind the dumpster after school, you punch it out, and then you get up, shake hands, and walk away friends. That's the way it was done. It's like, what have we become? We are these sniveling little wimps that, you said something bad to me. You're a bad person. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, you will think this is horrible what this teacher said to me. I'm serious. You will think it's horrible. But I tell you, it is one of the best things I could have heard, all right? Because I was an idiot, all right? I mean, I was this high school nut. I switched out of a class so I could be the teacher assistant for this teacher that I thought was just the coolest guy on 2 legs. I was like, oh, yeah. And I was a pest, really, right? Well, one day we're sitting in there, and he looks up from the papers he's grading. He looks right in my face. And this is at a Christian school, high school, by the way. This guy's a Christian. He said these mean things. He looked right at me, and he said, I don't like you half as much as you think I do. I was stunned. I didn't want to see me cry. I was like, I gotta go to the bathroom. I don't think I talked to him for a week. I was so hurt. But days or years later, I realized, he was setting some boundaries, right? He was making it clear. You gotta understand the relationship here properly, dude, right? And I needed it. I needed that slap, right? Of course, today, he'd probably been kicked out as a teacher. Oh, that's so harsh. That's harsh. Right? But in honesty, no, I was a goofball. I needed to be set straight. But, this is the country we live in, right? Every time you see this ad brought to you by the Ad Council, right? Well, what is it? Just a government bureaucracy, right? Telling us how to be. I mean, you'll think this. I try to be carry a little bit of shock value when I teach junior high students, right? So I tell them about the Marlboro Man. Do you remember the Marlboro Man? Da-da, dun, dun, da-da. Of course, he's selling cigarettes, right? But I miss the majesty of that commercial, right? Because I have a government that tells me we're not to have cigarettes. And I think not having cigarettes is a good idea. Don't get me wrong. Don't smoke, never have, never will, shouldn't do it, right? That was a pretty majestic commercial. And I miss it. Because why? The government's going to take care of me. Right? That's the problem. See, I don't have to deal with the responsibility of looking at the pack of cigarettes in the eye and saying, no, I'm going to govern myself and not. I don't have to do it. Because the government protects me from it. That's what we do to children, right? This is why we have a land full of children. We've broken this chain of Christianity that's moved westward, that was supposed to spread across this country and that we were to deliver to the world. We've broken it. We've broken it. We've broken it because we thought there was a better way. If we take away responsibility, you'll have a free and happy life. And so we put airbags everywhere in the car. I had an economics professor who told the class once, personally, I think we'd be better off if we just had a spike on that steering wheel, right? Because then everybody's polite, you know? Like, go ahead, you know, well, there's only a mile down. Let's just wait, you know? Like, I don't know. You know, like we'd be also polite on it. We would always blink, you know? I don't want to hit my spike, you know? But we don't think about these things, right? I mean, now we just have this circus in the car. Oh, got in an accident. Airbags went off. The kids loved it, you know? Ding, 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 ding. I'm just being silly at that point. But, I mean, it's just this drive. We're going to protect you. We're going to protect you. And look, airbags are not bad things. Don't misunderstand. I got airbags in my car. I'm thankful for it. My second son is learning to drive. He better have an airbag with a seatbelt. Right? I mean, I'm thankful for it. Don't get me wrong. But we live in this misguided thinking that somehow, if the government steps in and provides all these things, we've become safe. We're not. We're not. We're children. We're children. We behave like children. We need to skin our knees. We need to rub our elbows. Right? We need to get a few bruises in life. That's the stuff of living. And we don't live anymore. We just exist. We've broken the chain of Christianity. All right. I've gone over time. I'll get this PowerPoint posted for you and get an email out to you so you can see all the wise words of those slides that we missed. But this is critical. In a nation that desperately needs solutions, it's not just loud and boisterous talk. It is people of the book living by the book, people of dignity, walking in God's liberty, and accepting responsibility for each and every decision we make. This is what it will take. It's you and me doing this. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you that you never leave your people without a witness. And Father, we're thankful beyond words that you have given to us your Holy Spirit that can enlighten our hearts and minds, and not just enlighten our hearts and minds, but actually work real transformation in us, that we shine forth with the gospel of grace that was delivered to us by our Lord. And at the same time, Father, we're thankful that through history, you've given us those who are examples to us of how to walk in that faith and how to apply it to every area of life. Give us a heart and a desire to search out those things, to find truth and meaning and purpose in the history of our nation, the history of our faith. And where we're amiss, help us to be correct. Guide, lead, and direct us. Because, Father, I truly believe that whatever is needed to restore this nation can be found in its wonderful, blessed history that is a clear testimony of your hand leading, guiding, and directing. And so as we look to your word first and foremost, help us see those principles of your word enacted in history, that we become doubly fueled to be those that would work a restoration for your glory in your name. Father, I thank you for these who have come and that they'll stay committed, will continue through the remainder of our sessions, that we might become more enlightened regarding biblical truth and its application in history. We might become stronger in our faith, more confident